This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. What just happened didn't explode across your screen. It slipped through quietly. Legally, formally. While attention was pulled towards spectacle, something far more durable was locked into place. A switch flipped, not in the market, not in the streets, inside the system that decides when laws apply and when they don't. This wasn't done to protect people. It wasn't done to stabilize anything you can see. It was done to protect something abstract, something liquid, something that only matters if you understand how power actually moves. Most people will never be told this happened. And those who are told will be told the wrong reason. If you think this has nothing to do with you, that assumption is exactly what makes it work. Stay with me. Because what just occurred only makes sense if you know what usually comes times next asterisk. And once you see the sequence, you won't be able to unsee where this is going. We are trained to look for faces, leaders, villains, elections. That instinct is outdated. What actually governs outcomes now is not ideology or personality. It is access. Access to flows that never appear on ballots but decide what survives a crisis and what doesn't. There is a layer of the system most people never interact with: legal language. Emergency powers, financial plumbing. It only activates when something valuable is at risk of moving the wrong way. When that happens, the question is never, is this legal? The question is, can this be paused? Courts can be paused. Claims can be frozen. Rules can be reinterpreted. Not forever. Just long enough. This is how stability is manufactured, not by fixing damage, by deciding who is allowed to absorb it. Once you understand that, you stop asking why certain decisions feel rushed, or why they happen quietly, or why they are framed as temporary. Because temporary is all the system needs. And this only works if you believe it started recently. It didn't. There was a time when this didn't work so smoothly, when control required visibility. Troops, votes, treaties. That world moved slowly. Resistance had time to form. Now, power prefers duration over drama. The most important changes don't arrive as shocks. They arrive as adjustments, normalized, technical, boring. Before, control meant ownership. Now it means insulation. Before, disruption triggered debate. Now it triggers exemptions. Emergency language used to be rare. Now it's procedural. And that shift happened gradually enough that most people never marked the moment it became permanent. What matters isn't the crisis itself. It's what the crisis allows. Once an exception is created, it doesn't disappear. It waits, waiting for the next moment when something valuable is at risk, waiting to be reused, expanded, quietly copied elsewhere. That's why looking backward misses the danger. The damage isn't behind us. It's embedded, and it only becomes visible when the cost finally lands somewhere familiar. We're not there yet. Then the system tested itself. Not with an announcement. With a move so fast, it barely registered as a decision. In less than a day, authority crossed a line it rarely admits exists. Jurisdiction shifted, custody changed hands. And immediately, almost reflexively, the legal scaffolding followed. Emergency language appeared, not to explain what happened, but to control what could happen times after asterisk. Claims that had been valid for years were suddenly irrelevant. Processes that normally take decades were paused with a signature. This wasn't chaos. It was precision. Because the moment something this large changes control, everything downstream becomes unstable. Money tries to move. Creditors line up. Courts do what courts are designed to do, unless they're told not to. That instruction didn't come loudly. It came cleanly, formally. And most people missed it because they were still watching the dramatic part. But here's the problem. Once that switch is thrown, it can't be unthrown quietly. And this is where the real pressure begins. Here is how the system actually works. When something valuable changes hands under stress, the first threat isn't violence. It's enforcement, old contracts, unpaid judgments, legal claims waiting patiently in the background. Those claims represent friction. And friction is the one thing large-scale capital cannot tolerate during transition. So the system does something elegant. It reframes the asset, not as property, not as collateral, but as sovereign, untouchable, temporarily sacred. That designation doesn't protect a country. It protects continuity, because once funds are insulated, everything else becomes possible. Negotiations, frameworks, long-term arrangements that only work if the starting capital remains intact. The beneficiaries are never announced. They don't need to be. They arrive after the pause, after the courts go quiet, after uncertainty is concentrated somewhere else, and the damage doesn't vanish. It's absorbed, distributed outward, usually to people who never see the paperwork. This is the point of no return, because once protection is in place, reversal becomes theoretical. And what comes next is never debated in public. After insulation comes motion. Quiet at first. Meetings. Frameworks. Language about opportunity. Nothing public-facing looks aggressive. That's intentional. Because once protection is granted, speed becomes an advantage. Decisions that used to take years now take weeks. Access is discussed before legitimacy. Logistics before consent. This is where volatility enters. Markets adjust without explanation. Supply assumptions shift. Expectations move ahead of facts. You feel it as noise, as uncertainty, as something slightly off in places that used to feel stable. And when questions surface, they're answered with reassurance. Temporary, transitional, necessary. But here's the tell. No one is debating whether the system should slow down, only how quickly it can move without drawing attention. Because at this stage, delay is risk. And risk is something the system no longer tolerates. Once momentum builds, it doesn't wait for permission. It outruns it. This is where it reaches you. Not as policy, not as geopolitics, as consequence. You don't experience this as an executive order. You experience it as instability you can't quite explain. Prices that move before you're told why. Markets that react before you've had time to adjust. Rules that feel solid until suddenly they aren't. You are told this is abstract, that it's far away, that it's technical. But the system doesn't distinguish between over there and over here, only between protected and exposed. If you rely on predictability in your work, your savings, your future, then this matters. Because what just happened establishes a precedent. When strategic interests are at stake, normal safeguards become optional. That should make you uncomfortable. Not panicked, alert. If this kind of clarity matters to you, don't disengage now. This is the moment most people look away. And that's exactly when the next layer locks in. This doesn't stay contained. Systems like this never do. Once an exception is made, others start taking notes, quietly, strategically, because when one set of rules is suspended without consequence, it signals flexibility elsewhere. Currencies notice, allies notice, rivals notice, flows reroute in anticipation, not reaction. This is how local decisions become global pressure. Producers reassess exposure. Governments recalibrate assumptions about neutrality. Institutions that once trusted process begin planning for interference. Not publicly, privately, and the response isn't confrontation. It's hedging. Alternatives are explored. Backups are built. Dependencies are reduced. None of this looks dramatic in real time. It shows up later as fragmentation, as parallel systems, as a gradual loss of coherence that no single event can explain. This is where certainty starts to thin, because the system still functions. But fewer people believe it's permanent. And once belief erodes, acceleration follows. From here, the system has three ways forward. The first is adjustment. Structures bend but hold. Exceptions remain rare. The system absorbs the shock and resumes its rhythm. This path depends on restraint, on trust being quietly repaired, on belief returning before alternatives fully harden. The second path is erosion. Rules still exist, but selectively. Each exception makes the next easier. Legal certainty becomes conditional. Nothing breaks all at once. It just works less well, less predictably for more people. The third path is rupture. Confidence snaps, parallel systems stop hedging and start replacing. Flows don't just reroute, they exit. This is